September 19th, 1944. They called the American Sherman the Ronson. It burned easily, and against the German Panther, it was a helpless target. Imagine being locked inside a tank, knowing that if you strike the enemy head-on, your shell will simply bounce off, a terrifying sign that your life is over. This single piece of German arrogance, the invincibility of their sloped armor, was the greatest psychological weapon on the Western Front. But deep inside the American ammunition racks, a secret project, 6 rounds of ammunition containing a core of tungsten carbide, was waiting. These few shells, engineered in total secrecy, were about to transform the Sherman from a victim into a predator and shatter German confidence forever. This is the story of the HVAP round and the moment one small piece of metal changed the course of the war. The year is 1944, the fog-shrouded fields near Aurecourt, France. First Lieutenant Merwin Men of the 37th Tank Battalion grips his Sherman's turret rim. He and his crew have been warned about the Panthers, the formidable German tanks whose sloped armor has proven nearly impervious to their standard shells. They know that hitting one head-on is effectively a death sentence. Their standard armor-piercing rounds simply ricochet or splinter against that thick German steel. This single devastating fact, the presumed invincibility of the Panther's frontal armor, was the source of the tactical terror that dictated every armored engagement on the Western Front. It was a critical dilemma that threatened to undermine the entire American armored operation in Europe. Tucked into the ammunition rack are those 6 special rounds, 6 M93 high-velocity armor-piercing rounds, each containing that dense core of tungsten carbide. These 6 shells, externally identical to standard rounds, were about to rewrite the tactical calculus of armored warfare. They would transform the medium Sherman from a fearful victim into what German tankers would soon fear as an unexpected, deadly predator. These few specialized shells, a triumph of material science and industrial necessity, were about to shatter German assumptions and provide the Allied crews with the crucial, undeniable advantage they desperately needed. The critical problem facing the United States Army in early 1944 was undeniable. The M4 Sherman, the backbone of the American armored divisions, was effective against the Panzer IV and lighter vehicles, but it was hopelessly outmatched by the Panther and the Tiger. Their standard 75mm and early 76mm guns could not consistently penetrate the Panther's sloped glacis plate at typical combat ranges. This wasn't a failure of the American crews. It was a fundamental failure of material science. German armor design, focused on thickness and sloped plates, had created a temporary technological superiority that America had to immediately overcome. The American solution, codenamed the T4 program, was to fundamentally rethink the shell itself. The result was the M93, commonly known as HVAP for high-velocity armor piercing, or simply the tungsten core round. The design was a revolutionary counter to the German armor versus gun race. Instead of relying on a large, solid steel shell, the HVAP round used a sub-caliber projectile concept. A light, frangible aluminum casing, called a sabot, surmounted a dense, small-diameter core of tungsten carbide. When fired, the explosive force propelled this entire assembly. Just moments after exiting the barrel, the sabot fell away, leaving the dense, dart-like tungsten core to fly toward the target at speeds up to 4,000 feet per second, dramatically faster than any conventional round. This extreme velocity concentrated the shell's kinetic energy into a tiny point, allowing it to punch through armor that would simply repel a much larger, slower steel shell. The psychological dimension of this new munition was immense. American crews felt fundamentally outgunned and outclassed by the Panthers, and that morale drain was as dangerous as any German shell. The Germans, in turn, had grown arrogant, trusting completely in their armor's invulnerability. The HVAP round was designed not just to pierce steel, but to shatter German assumptions and restore the American tankers' offensive confidence. The challenge of producing the HVAP round was staggering, comparable in secrecy and priority to the Manhattan Project. Tungsten was a rare, strategic resource, and its processing into the required form was complex and difficult. Engineers had to overcome immense technical hurdles to fuse the tungsten carbide into the precise, hard crystalline cores needed for deep penetration. Furthermore, the specialized manufacturing required to produce the light aluminum sabot and ensure the round's stability in flight limited the production rates to a fraction of the desired output. Initial plans called for a sustained rate of 300,000 HVAP rounds per month for the 76mm gun alone. However, this target was never met. Tungsten was also required for high-speed cutting tools in the massive American industrial machine, and it was too valuable and scarce a resource to divert entirely to ammunition. The final, painful compromise meant that American tankers would never receive the volume of tungsten rounds they desired. But commanders realized that even a small supply, strategically distributed, would be enough to change the game entirely. The solution wasn't numerical, it was tactical. The moment of truth arrived on September 19, 1944, near Eracourt. First Lieutenant Merwin Menn's 37th Tank Battalion encountered a powerful counterattack that featured a large concentration of Panthers. This was exactly the terrifying scenario American tankers dreaded. As the German tanks advanced through the mist-covered terrain, Menn's Sherman crews had no choice but to engage. They fired their standard ammunition, and, as expected, the rounds simply bounced off the Panther's sloped frontal armor, creating the terrible high-pitched ringing sound that signaled failure. Then, Lieutenant Menn, following secret guidance, gave the order to load the new ammunition. The gunners, many firing the round for the first time in combat, slammed the tungsten core rounds into the breach. What followed was an immediate, decisive, and terrifying shift in the armored balance of power. The tungsten rounds struck the Panther's frontal armor not with the familiar clang of a glancing blow, but with a sharp, explosive crack that signaled the shell was passing through the thick German steel. One round struck a Panther directly at its frontal glacis and penetrated, triggering catastrophic secondary explosions. Another struck a Panther's turret, sending blindingly hot metal and shrapnel flying inside the fighting compartment. The effect was conclusive. In the span of 2 intense days of fighting, the 37th Tank Battalion, using only a limited number of these specialized shells, achieved disproportionately devastating results. The HVAP rounds destroyed or disabled several Panthers from ranges and angles previously considered impossible for a Sherman. The American crews were instantly galvanized. For the first time, they knew they held a genuine, reliable counter to the dreaded German armor. The fear factor had been neutralized. The German response was immediate confusion, panic, and disbelief. The psychological impact on the German armor divisions was profound. Tank crews who had fought with absolute confidence behind their seemingly invincible armor suddenly realized they were vulnerable to American tanks they had openly mocked as Ronsons or Tommy Cookers. An intercepted German tank crew report from the Eracourt sector stated the sudden appearance of an unknown armor-piercing projectile capable of frontal penetration. This frightening intelligence forced a complete, panicked reassessment of American capabilities at the highest levels of the Wehrmacht. German commanders were forced to adopt new, restrictive, and ultimately defensive tactics. Panther crews were suddenly ordered to avoid frontal engagements with Shermans, a humiliating and crippling concession that fundamentally negated the entire purpose of their superior armor design. They had to rely more on deeply concealed ambush positions, flanking maneuvers, and the element of surprise, which severely restricted their operational mobility. The tactical shift was palpable across the entire front. American tank crews, bolstered by the psychological confidence that they carried a weapon that could finally defeat the Panther, immediately shed their fear and became confident attackers. They engaged German armor directly, relying on their superior numbers, better logistics, and the Sherman's quicker turret traverse. The HVAP round, though always scarce, provided the essential psychological and tactical edge needed for this complete transformation of battlefield roles.
The tungsten core of the HVAP round proved that industrial capacity and material science, applied intelligently to an urgent tactical problem, could overcome seemingly insurmountable technical disadvantages. The American industrial machine, focused on the need for mass production, had initially ceded the lead in armor design, but it countered with a revolution in ammunition design. This fundamental lesson, paid for in blood across the battlefields of Europe, remains directly relevant for military planners facing the technological challenges of modern warfare. The solution to a superior platform is often a superior projectile. The crews who fired those first HVAP rounds at Aracourt, watching the tungsten cores punch through armor that had seemed invincible, were part of a genuine turning point in the psychological balance of the European war. The HVAP ammunition, though never available in the desired quantities, provided enough improved capability to transform American tank crews from uncertain defenders into confident, capable attackers, willing to engage German armor directly. This shift in tactical psychology, enabled by tungsten core ammunition produced in American factories, influenced every subsequent armored engagement of the European war, forcing the Germans onto the defensive and cementing the Shermans' eventual triumph.